Hey everybody, this is my thoughts on the Steam demo of what they're currently calling Trepang2, but I don't know if they're going to continue calling that throughout the rest of its development. So if they do end up changing the name for this, I'll put either a comment and pin it in the comment section below, or I'll change the title of the video to say aka whatever the actual title is. But regardless, this is still very much a work in progress. This is a very early demo, and it is suitably very janky in a lot of spots, particularly with regards to the physics constantly glitching out in frankly hilarious ways most of the time. And since it is such an early demo, I'm not going to really talk much about the presentation other than to say it does run in Unreal Engine 4, and for an Unreal Engine 4 game that is an indie production in particular, it runs very well for the most part. I did notice some occasional frame rate hitching, but nothing major, and apart from the issues with the physics that I mentioned before, pretty much everything in the game seems to run well and work just fine, so there's nothing really problematic to speak of on that front, and they certainly don't give you much to go on in terms of story, this being more of a gameplay proof of concept demo than anything else. And the basic idea is that you are some sort of super soldier and you start the game out in chains and you have to escape, and once you get to a certain point using the frankly kind of broken stealth mechanics, which admittedly this is again very early, so hopefully they'll polish those up later, you come across some armor and a pistol and it throws you right into the gameplay portion of trying to escape whatever facility you've woken up in, and that will take you through some fairly brief combat encounters where you get a pretty good indication of how the game is actually going to play out. Apart from this campaign mission of sorts, or at least something styled to be like a campaign mission, you also have a couple of horde maps where it basically is just an arena for you to run around in, and it will spawn in enemies in waves and you have to defeat the waves until eventually you hit the 30th wave, at which point you've won the horde mode. There's also an additional sort of campaign-like mission where you go from area to area, you occasionally have to unlock some doors, and you just basically mow down anything that gets in your way until eventually you get to the exit point. But regardless of which one of these you're playing, there's nothing particularly complex about them. It's basically go from arena to arena and mow down everything in your path, and thus everything really does fall to the gameplay to make things interesting. And if you start the demo off by playing the campaign missions, you're going to find that the first thing it introduces you to is the stealth system, which basically involves simply staying in the shadows as much as you can, and trying not to make that much noise. I didn't really notice much going on with the sound portion of that, but the shadow mechanic is very simplistic in its current state, and it barely even functions, so that's definitely something they need to work on, but that's not really what the game is about. The game is really more about the actual combat system, which I think is actually best described with the following. As you can see, it's very reminiscent of the likes of F.E.A.R, where you have a slow motion mechanic that you can engage as long as you have meter for it, and this will allow you to basically run circles around your enemies and just mow them down with relative ease in a pretty spectacular fashion. There's also 3 different varieties of melee attacks where you can just run up to somebody and start bashing them upside the head with your gun, or you can do a jump kick by pressing the jump key and then the melee attack, or you can slide into enemies and send them ragdolling across the map in a manner that will never fail to make you giggle. And eviscerating your foes is the primary method you're going to be charging up your slow-mo meter, because even though it does recharge at a very slow rate, it recharges a lot more quickly if you score kills. But you do still have to be careful, at least if you're playing on the harder difficulty settings, because even though you are pretty much an unstoppable juggernaut of death, if you're stupid about being that unstoppable juggernaut of death, the enemy will be able to take you down, because there's no regenerating health. You have an armor meter and a health meter, and to replenish them you have to find health kits, or in the case of armor, you can find armor plates, or vests, or helmets, or whatever the case may be, just scattered around, and even that drop from enemies after you kill them. This does encourage a rather aggressive style of play that gets you up close and personal with enemies, and to that end, they give you a particular tool for the job that few other games have mastered to this degree. Now that, my friends, is a fucking shotgun. And while it is certainly the most ridiculously satisfying weapon in this demo, not a single one of the weapons are any sort of slouch either. Every single one of them feels pretty powerful in its own right. Although the pistol and the submachine gun are definitely reduced in their effectiveness once the more heavily armored enemies start showing up, and you'll probably be scrambling to find something more along the lines of the assault rifle. This does lead me into one issue that the demo has, which is the lack of any sort of long-range weapon. The closest thing you have to that is either the assault rifle or the suppressed assault rifle, but aside from that, the only other weapons you get access to are a pistol and a suppressed pistol, as well as the shotgun and the submachine gun. There's no long-ranged weapon that allows you to deal with enemies at a pretty far distance, so when you go into certain environments and you're going to find enemies pretty far off that are still able to shoot at you at relatively good accuracy, hitting them is actually fairly difficult because there's no way to zoom in or aim down your sights or anything like that, and the developers have explicitly stated that this was a conscious design choice because when they had that in there in test versions previously, it made the game a hell of a lot worse. Now, the developers have mentioned that they plan on putting some sort of long-range weapon in there that has some sort of scope or zoom function, so that will basically fill that niche, but in its current state there isn't one, so you kind of have to make do with either the pistol or the assault rifle, and that's a bit easier said than done because this game does have arbitrary inaccuracy, and more importantly, it has some pretty hefty recoil on certain weapons, particularly the assault rifle, so getting a good hit on an enemy at a long distance is a fairly difficult proposition at this time. And unfortunately, it's not so much because of whether or not you're skilled at the game, it's more the fact that they don't really give you the tool needed for some sort of long-range engagement at this time. It is very clearly geared around short to medium range engagements, and it excels in that, but once you go beyond that range, you start to run into problems. Now thankfully, most of the environments you'll see in the demo are geared more towards that, and you will be doing primarily short to medium range combat, but there are a couple of areas that open up, particularly in that second campaign level that I mentioned, and those can be a bit annoying. But to be fair, this is a work in progress game, and they've got plenty to do before everything is actually finalized, so they'll certainly get to putting some sort of long-range implement in there at some point, I have no doubt. Much like I'm sure they'll work on the jankiness, and some of the visuals will change and hopefully improve by the time the game launches as well, although part of me hopes they keep the really janky physics things, because again, those are honestly pretty hilarious. Maybe if they decide to keep things more polished by the time the game actually launches and take things a bit more seriously, they can put in some sort of unlockable cheat that enables the ridiculous physics or something along those lines. We'll just have to wait and see, I guess. But as for what they've got right now, it is incredibly satisfying when everything is firing on all cylinders. I mean, you've got this really fast, punchy, brutal, absolutely visceral, and sometimes a bit disgusting combat where you can just basically turn enemies into a fine mist, blow them into meaty chunks, blast chunks off of them, punch their heads off, punch their arms and legs off. It just gets insane, but in a very primally satisfying way. It very much gives you the same kind of vibe that the original F.E.A.R did, where you'd go into an area and you'd just start fighting the enemy and absolutely tear the place up with chunks being blasted off of the walls, enemies being just blasted all over the place, blood, guts, and spit everywhere, all the while going in and out of slow motion, seeing bullets whizzing through the air with obvious trails and having all kinds of slow motion particle effects going on and everything like that. It's just downright glorious. And it manages to be a ton of fun even in such an early, blatantly unfinished state. I mean, like I said, the stealth system barely functions, and you even have a cloaking mechanic that I didn't really use all that much, precisely because the stealth system is just such a mess right now, and more importantly, why would I do that when I can just do pretty much everything that I've been showing you in the video thus far, which is just way more fun. So if they want to make stealth and the cloak mode and all that sort of thing a major part of the game, they really need to do quite a lot more work on that stealth system and get it working properly and have it actually being something that's very viable and very useful, as opposed to being that one thing that you mess with up until you get access to guns. Because I mean, really, why would you use the stealth system when you can just do stuff like this? Yeah, honestly, I think that just speaks for itself, really. So I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this and seeing what they do to continue adding to the game, and whenever the game launches in full, I'm definitely going to be picking up a copy and reviewing it as soon as I can. But if you're looking to give this thing a try for yourself, I will have a link in the video description box where you can check the game out on Steam. They do have the free demo available on the Steam page, although I would definitely like to reiterate that this is very much a work in progress. Expect a lot of jankiness, and don't necessarily expect it to run all that well across all systems. My system runs it very well, but to be fair, I have a pretty powerful computer, even if it is a bit dated at this point. For the sake of comparison, I'm running an i7-4790K, 16 gigs of RAM, and a GTX 1080, so if you have a system that's more powerful than mine or less powerful than mine, your mileage is definitely going to vary. But you know what? Even if you are concerned about performance, the demo is available for free, so you might as well give it a shot anyway. And between this and other recent releases and other games on the horizon, it's a damn good time to be a first-person shooter fan. Thanks for watching. And if you like what I do, then please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. Every single cent from that goes directly back into the channel in some way or another. And if you can't or don't want to do that, then that's fine, I understand. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in later videos.